Hello, this is Kyrasis, and in this Blood Death Knight analysis video, we will be talking about the implications of the Shrouded Seasonal Affix for Blood Death Knights in Mythic Plus content. This includes talking about both the Shrouded buff effect and the Shrouded enemies themselves. At the start of the Mythic Plus dungeon, players are given a choice on what secondary stat they would like to gain from the Seasonal Affix between Critical Strike, Haste, Mastery, and Versatility. If you do not make a selection at the NPC, you will be given versatility by default. As for the buff stacks themselves, you will be given one stack of the buff effect immediately after buff selection, one stack for each Dreadlord you kill in the dungeon, and 3 stacks if you kill Solgamox, the Dreadlord mini-boss. So, this bonus will slowly ramp up in power throughout the dungeon you are in. But let us take a look at the options we have available to us. Critical Strike gives 2% additive critical strike chance per stack, notably without any corresponding parry bonus. Haste gives a 2% haste multiplier per stack. Versatility gives 1% additive versatility per stack, which includes half of a percent of passive damage reduction. And Mastery gives 69 mastery rating per stack. In short, all of these bonuses provide you with secondary stats in the same way you would gain them if they came from Soulbind traits in Shadowlands. But between the 4, which stats are ones that we are interested in taking? First, while these aren't exactly equivalent, mostly because Critical Strike isn't providing full benefits and because Haste is a multiplier in this scenario, let us look at how much rating we would normally need from each of these secondary stats to provide a similar bonus that is being given to us here. While most of the buff effects generally provide enough of a bonus to be somewhere in the ballpark of 70 secondary stat rating, Versatility, in particular, is at a larger disadvantage than normal, since it is only providing a bonus that is equivalent to 40 versatility rating. And, for that reason, it is mostly not an option we are considering for the affix buff. Someone could make an argument that versatility might be needed in super high keys to better survive particularly high burst damage, but as Blood Death Knights, even if you were doing insanely difficult keys that had some pretty severe one-shot checks, there would likely be more efficient ways to deal with that problem elsewhere rather than getting versatility stacks from the Shrouded Affix over a different stat we could gain in higher quantities. Meanwhile, Critical Strike without any parry contribution isn't even close to being a competitive option in Mythic Plus, so that is also easy to remove from consideration, leaving us with only Haste and Mastery as potential options. Between Haste and Mastery, you likely know that we normally have a preference towards Haste rating over Mastery rating, even though Mastery isn't necessarily a bad stat. This is even before we talk about how Mastery here is subject to diminishing returns with the Shrouded buff, while the Haste bonus is not subject to diminishing returns, and is provided in the form of a Haste multiplier that provides much more value than the same amount of extra Haste from undiminished Haste rating. So, picking Haste looks like a pretty straightforward choice, and, for the most part, it probably is. Still, having access to such a large haste multiplier also has a few weird implications for Blood Death Knights that are worth talking about. Now, I've talked about this in other videos and in my written Blood Death Knight guide, but the main thing that makes haste our best stat right now is its ability to improve our Dancing Rune Weapon uptime through our tier set bonus. More haste leads to more heart strikes, which leads to more Dancing Rune Weapon extension overall, which also gives us better uptime on our increased strength stacks from the tier set bonus. However, in any situation where you are already able to maintain full Dancing Rune Weapon uptime, then haste goes from being our overall best secondary stat to our worst secondary stat, because not only are we not gaining any additional benefits through our tier set bonus, but by the time you reach the point of full Dancing Rune Weapon uptime consistently, you are also deep into haste diminishing returns. Alright, before we go on, I just want to take a moment to provide a big disclaimer. For a large range of key levels, maintaining high uptimes on Dancing Rune Weapon is very important to your overall success as a Blood Death Knight in Mythic Plus. So, if you are attempting to min-max your performance in a way that makes Dancing Rune Weapon harder to maintain, it may end up doing more harm than good if it results in significantly more Dancing Rune Weapon downtime. However, because our dancing rune weapon uptime is dependent on a number of factors, including how well a player is able to execute the rotation and how often you are being melee attacked, there is never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for what is the best build to run. As a result, the best solution is also going to be player specific, and it is not going to be something any one person can prescribe to you personally. That being said, let us take a look at some of the potential implications of having all of this extra haste available from the Shrouded Affix. The first potential implication we have on this list is the fact that the haste affix makes playing Night Fae a lot more accessible. Night Fae has a number of advantages over Kyrian, but its main downside is that it has significantly less runes available to extend Dancing Rune Weapon, and that it is somewhat more difficult to play. So, regardless of its potential advantages with mitigation throughput, damage throughput, effective health, and uncapped AoE threat, the potential for significant Dancing Rune Weapon downtime was not seen as worth the risk for most players during Season 3 of Shadowlands. However, with access to all of this extra haste through the Shrouded Affix, it should make it a lot easier for players to maintain healthy Dancing Rune Weapon uptimes throughout keys as Night Fae in Season 4 than it was in Season 3, so we may see higher Night Fae representation this season because of this affix. Still, it's a sizable hit to your Dancing Rune Weapon uptime, so strong gear and strong execution may still be needed to make Night Fae a potential option. The second potential implication is that we may see players shift haste rating on gear from haste to alternative stats such as versatility, at least in some amounts. So, once you have enough haste stacks, you will have near full Dancing Rune Weapon uptime despite having less haste rating from gear than normal, in addition to being stronger overall from the alternative stats. Unlike Night Fae, this gives you a little more control over how much you want to lower your Dancing Rune Weapon potential in order to gain other bonuses. Though, like the Night Fae option, you are still trying to offset your build for the Shrouded Affix buffs, which are going to be weaker at the start of the key and stronger by the end of the key, so you may find it difficult to find the right balance for the key as a whole, since there are definitely consistency issues with the Shrouded bonus itself. Still, even if the best balance of stats is unclear, there are potential gains to be had from some level of stat rebalancing if you find yourself with excessive Dancing Rune Weapon durations. The third and final option is taking Mastery instead of Haste from the Shrouded Affix. The idea here is that you are using a build that can reach near full Dancing Rune Weapon uptime without relying on any haste from the Shrouded Affix at all. This has the advantage in that your Dancing Rune Weapon uptime won't fluctuate throughout the dungeon, but the main disadvantage is that this is likely the weakest option between the three on this list, since we are not making use of the multiplicative haste bonus we have available to us through the Shrouded Affix. It will be interesting to see whether or not players pursue any of these options this season and to what extent they do, but these are options that you will likely see some players experimenting with, particularly on the higher end. However, that's enough talk about the Shrouded stat buff. Let us now talk about the Shrouded enemies themselves, starting with the normal Dreadlords. The normal Dreadlords have 3 abilities, and all of them are significant to your play. First, Dreadlords have a high magic damage tank buster in the form of Vampiric Claws. This ability cannot be parried, it is extremely hard to outrange once they begin casting it, and it can be used as frequently as every 14 seconds. Beyond its high damage output and kill potential when mixed with other enemies, you will notice that it can also heal the Dreadlord for a lot of health based on the damage it deals. However, it cannot heal from damage that is absorbed, and the Dreadlords cannot use this ability when the tank is not in melee range. As such, counterplay is fairly straightforward. You can either directly reduce the incoming damage with Anti-Magic Zone, Icebound Fortitude, or Rune Tap, or you can absorb incoming damage with Anti-Magic Shell or Tombstone. That being said, be careful when considering Rune Tap, since we hurt our Dancing Rune Weapon economy whenever we are using this ability because of the rune cost. Since Tombstone also supports our Dancing Rune Weapon economy, that's another ability where you don't want to get yourself killed by using it specifically for this purpose if the conditions aren't right for it. That being said, all of the abilities on this list can significantly reduce Dreadlord healing when used at the right times. Next, we can prevent Dreadlords from casting this ability if we are actively kiting them. However, there is a time and a place where this can be a good or a bad decision, depending on what is going on with the pull as a whole, so only use this tactic when it is appropriate. Finally, the faster the Dreadlords die, the less they are going to be able to cast this ability to heal in the first place, so they can sometimes be valuable focus targets depending on the priorities of your current pull. The next two abilities are Nightmare Cloud and Carrion Swarm, which are both avoidable abilities that target random non-tank players. I'll be grouping them up because the counterplay is very similar between the two. Sleep Cloud will put down a moving ground zone that puts everyone to sleep who steps on it. This sleep effect does not break on damage taken and does not cause you to lose threat on enemies, but it is dispellable by other players. Carrion Swarm, on the other hand, is a 15-yard cone ability with a cast time that deals magic damage and applies a 50% healing received debuff to all players hit. This debuff is also dispellable, much like the sleep. While both of these effects can simply be avoided, it can be beneficial to be considerate towards our group members by trying to tank Dreadlords away from walls and in open areas as much as possible. Area denial can become a problem in more limited areas, and we want to lower the chances of anyone getting hit by these abilities as much as we can, especially since both abilities are potentially lethal. That being said, if we are forced into these mechanics for whatever reason, Anti-Magic Shell has the ability to immune both debuff applications, while Lichborn can both break and immune the sleep effect. Overall, the Dreadlords are usually pretty manageable when added into normal dungeon pools, but their effects can often make them more dangerous and more annoying than normal enemies. However, the buff stacks they provide are a good investment, especially when they are killed in the earlier parts of the dungeon. So, as long as you expect to get at least some value out of the buff stacks, Dreadlords are generally seen as worthwhile to kill, but your mileage may vary. Now, the Dreadlord miniboss Zolgamox is completely different with a total of 4 abilities. The first ability she has is Shadow Claws, which is a stacking magic dot that is applied to us through Zolgamox's auto attacks. This dot is dispellable, and while we have the ability to use Anti-Magic Shell to counter it, there are usually other things we would like to use Anti-Magic Shell on instead. Her second ability is Hypnosis Bat, which is a summoned unit that fixates a non-tank player. This bat attempts to cast a single lethal ability on its fixated target after it is summoned. But if anyone interrupts this ability once, it will not recast this ability for the rest of its duration. For Blood Death Knights, the only tool we have available to us to stop this cast is Asphyxiate, so feel free to use Asphyxiate as appropriate. Next, Zolgamox has an avoidable AoE attack called Shadow Eruption that applies an unremovable 70% healing received debuff to all targets hit, in addition to high magic damage. The standard advice is simply to not stand in this ability. However, Anti-Magic Shell can be used to immune the debuff and to negate a large portion of the hit if needed, but the gains are pretty minimal from using Anti-Magic Shell in this way. Finally, Zolgamox has a Blood Barrier cast that gives her an Absorb Shield and stops her from being kicked, while she drains health from all players over time. The initial heal is fixed, while any additional healing is proportional to the AoE Leech channeled ability. Similar to Vampiric Claws, this ability heals Zolgamox based on the damage she deals, but only for 100% of damage done instead of 300%. Also like Vampiric Claws, she does not heal from any absorbed damage. As such, the counterplay is largely the same as Vampiric Claws. Any of the previously listed damage reduction and absorb effects can gain extra value during Blood Barrier to reduce Zolgamox's total healing, while killing her faster and reducing her overall healing potential is also a counterplay option. Overall, Zolgamox is a very time-consuming enemy to kill. She scales in a way that makes this more of a problem on higher key levels, and her damage is significant enough that it is hard to do too much trash in addition to her at the same time, especially since you barely do any damage to her at all if she is not the focus target of a pull due to her periodic healing. This early in the season, a lot of teams seem to be leaning into killing Zolgamox more times than not, especially since the buff stacks can make other parts of the dungeons less difficult, and if you do believe that you have enough time in the dungeon where killing Zolgamox isn't going to deplete a key on its own, just from a time angle. So, the real question we are going to need to ask ourselves is whether or not the extra time investment is worth the benefit she is providing for the remainder of the dungeon. And that is a question that different people seem to have different answers to at this time, at least on higher key levels. So, depending on the circumstances, either fighting her or avoiding her may be the correct decision. In conclusion, we talked about the general power levels of the different Shrouded secondary stat buffs for Blood Death Knights. We discussed the possible implications of extremely high haste levels for Blood Death Knights, and we reviewed some specific counterplay options for the Shrouded Dreadlord enemies. If you would like to make it easier for other players to find this content, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, if there are any additional topics you would like to see in the future, or if you have any opinions of your own about the Shrouded Affix, I'd like to hear your opinions in the comments below. I can also be contacted through Discord, and my information can be found in the video description. In the meantime, good luck and have fun.